Ever wish you had someone to tell you the truth about what it takes to run a successful business and live a fulfilling life? Well, amiguita, you've come to the right place. So grab your favorite cafecito or cocktail, your courage, and let's get to work. I'm Jenna Saborges, a therapist, business strategist, mindset coach for entrepreneurs, and a feisty Latina from Miami. And I'm determined to teach you the exact tools you need to stop settling and start kicking some serious derriere. What do you say? Are you in? Then let's get started. Welcome to Latinas Empowering Latinas podcast. A few weeks ago, somebody asked a question that I felt needed an entire podcast episode to discuss. The question was, how do you feel about constantly being asked to interpret for families? Are you compensated for it? How have you set boundaries around this matter? And it was in a Facebook group, and somebody actually tagged me and said, would you mind sharing your thoughts on this? You're very knowledgeable. This is a multi-level, heavy question because my instinct is to say the feminist in me would tell you to fight, to argue, to stand up for yourself, to fight back. But realistically, it can cost you your job. And when I was in my role as a school social worker for over 10 years up north, I was often pulled to translate, especially if it was a heavy Latino population that ironically did not have a heavy Latino administrative staff that was support staff. There were teachers and I think there was like one guidance counselor. I mean, this was a really big school is the one I'm thinking about, a high school. And I was often pulled, but that was the case. I worked in a lot of different schools and there used to be heavy Latino population. And there was a disconnect between the population we were serving and the staff that was hired to support that. Oftentimes, I was the one that was being called in to translate, whether it was my case or not my case. And when I was 22 and still green, I was more than happy to be needed and to be counted on. But as you know, if you work in schools, that there's always something to do. And just like the teachers are slammed with new curriculum to cover, we answer to the students, the parents, the teachers, the administrators, the director of special services, the dean of students, the assistant principal, you name it, the district director, sometimes even the superintendent, depending on the case. There were so many layers of things that were just packed on, and it felt like the more that I did, the more that was given to me. Not because I was a favorite or not because I was compensated for it, but it was because I was there. And there wasn't enough support. And the more needs that there were, they wouldn't hire new people. They would give the current staff more and more responsibilities, which obviously it always came from the top. But more so than not, it also caused a lot of friction with the whole team, with the child study team, with the teachers. There was a lot of resentment. The caseloads were really big. The support was really low. There were not enough of us and too many needs in the community and the school, but the budget was always allocated for different places. And we're not going to get into the red tape. But realistically, I know that it can cost you your job. I thought of some things that I did when I was being pulled in a million different directions, especially when it came into becoming a translator for a lot of meetings. One of the things that you can do, and this would be my biggest thing, is here's the deal. You can't justify and say you don't have enough time or you have too many things on your plate or you can't get things done because the only thing that they will hear is you're not getting your job done. It doesn't matter if they added 20 more responsibilities than when you joined up. It is your responsibility. You are salaried. Whether you have to stay late because a child is in crisis. How many times did I have to follow an ambulance to a hospital and stay with a child until their parents showed up? Crazy stuff until very late at night. But that was my responsibility as the school social worker. And it stinks, but the reality is, at least my perception is I always felt like the bottom feeder. I always felt that people felt that the school social worker was the paper pusher, have to save the community. We had to do it all. And it was really unfair and it took a tremendous toll. And while I loved serving my community and I loved working with the kids, for me, it was not sustainable. I wanted to do it on my terms. I didn't want the red tape. I didn't want to have to answer to the million people. And eventually that's why I decided to go into private practice. If things were different, but I'm sure they're still not, I would have probably stayed in school social work forever. Okay, back to what you can do. One of the biggest things that you can do is say, I know that there's this huge need in our population. I have an idea. At least insofar as the children that are classified, if that's your role on a child study team, you can ask for, listen, I completely understand. I'm one of very few people that can speak the language fully. Can you just assign me the cases that are Spanish speaking only? What this does is, yes, it doesn't give you, right, the strength to have plethora of diversity. But what it does do is, at least when you're getting pulled for these cases, they're already your clients. They're already on your caseload. That way you get to really know the families. You get to advocate for them. Chances are you're going to be sitting in on their meetings anyway. And now you are the case manager. That's one thing. The second thing that you can do is become really resourceful. I don't know where you are, and I don't know what exists at the moment because I've been out of school social work for a while. But what you can do is look into different community resources. There are different translation services. At one point, I was asked to translate documents, legal documents in Spanish. And that was when at least I had the honest response of, I am a native speaker. I know basic grammar. I do not know how to translate these documents. I don't know clinical words. I don't know legal words. I can conversationally translate, but my grammar is not fluent. Thank goodness that that was the case. Well, what happened was then I was able to locate somebody that translated documentation. And they felt comfortable with that because I was letting them know I just don't know how. It's not that I don't want to, I don't know how. So while you're looking for some resources in the community, there are actually a lot of resources, organizations that do advocate for parents. And a lot of them do have translation services. There are a lot of people that are retired that can translate. There are a lot of people in the world that want to do something a little differently. And there are resources that exist. The first thing is I'd ask to take over the Spanish speaking cases. The second thing I would do is also ask for resources in your community that can actually pull in to translate. So it's not affecting everybody. Another thing you can do, and again, this is a little dicier, is you can see if the people that are Spanish speaking in the building, so whether it's a guidance counselor, a teacher, an administrator, a secretary, if there's a way for you guys to rotate if translations are needed. That's another thing. Another thing you can do is see if the cases that you're working on, if they're not your cases, if there is a family member that is bilingual that can help in the translation services. Here's the reality. If you weren't in the building, they'd find a way, but you are, and they take advantage. They do. I was in several different school districts, and that's just the way it rolls. The third thing you can do, if you've really had it, if you feel like none of this is working, if you feel like nobody has your back, something that I did is before I kind of stirred the pot, right? I actually reached out to different school districts and I sent them my resume. I mean, we're talking about hundreds of resumes. I didn't look for positions that were open. I saturated the school districts in the areas that I was interested or willing to travel to, and I sent my resume. And every single school social worker position that I ever got was because somebody had received my resume and pulled it when it was time that it was needed. Because what people did is they put it to the side. So when there was a need, I think I covered a retirement, I covered a maternity leave. Unfortunately, I covered a death that was unexpected. People are always going to be needing. And it's interesting because school social work positions are very rare. So are school psychologist positions, because people that are usually in those positions like to keep them for life and they retire into them. So what I did is I didn't look for openings. I saturated the market. When you do this, if you know the school system, and if you don't know, I'm going to give you a little explanation here, is that there is something called steps. That is how your salary is calculated. When you go into a school system and they will tell you, okay, based on your years of experience, this is the step that you land on. Here's the reality. You can negotiate that. They don't want to tell you that, but here's the truth. I always use my bilingual skills, my second language, as a negotiating piece to always go higher on the scale. Here's the thing. Once you get salaried and you're into the system and you're on the scale, you cannot jump around unless you go ahead and like get your master's or get a higher degree. And you're not moving up, you're moving sideways. And again, it's hard to see. It's a chart. Schools don't like to give them out. They poo-poo other employees that share it. It's supposed to be against rules. If you dig hard enough, sometimes you can find it. If you have a good friend in the system, you can find it. So what I always did is I negotiated up. I made a lot of moves as a school social worker, but every single time I learned my lesson and I negotiated. And the first thing I used was my bilingual skills. Here's the thing though, once you're negotiating that high, you have to understand that if you're saying bilingual is my skill, you have to kind of set up expectations or what you can offer from the beginning. But again, once you're in that system, they can really ask you for anything. I hope that this helped you. I'm sorry it took me so long to get back to you. I hope that everybody listening has a takeaway of what you can do when you're feeling stuck in a system. You always have power to change. You can always get up and go. But realistically, when you're counting on something, it is very hard to stand up for yourself, but there's always a way to figure it out. Till next time.
Thank you so much for joining me today. It's always such an honor to speak to you. If you loved today's episode, I would love and be so grateful if you left a review. So let me know what was your greatest takeaway, any aha moments, and how you were inspired. I'd love to give you a shout out in a future episode. Until next time, amiguita.